Hey adventurers, so today is going to be another book review. This is going to be for Fleeting Word by Andrew D. Meredith. So this is fantasy, high fantasy, epic fantasy, lots of those, bit of military fantasy to some degree, although it's less of that because it's kind of at the end of the wars and it's taking place outside of them. But anyways, that's not so important. Yeah, let's get into this. So Fleeting Word is a Kallattian Legacy novella from Andrew D. Meredith. This is set before the events of his current series, which is the Kallattian Saga. So this is in the same world as the Kallattian Saga, it's just set beforehand and it's a novella. So far, everything that I've read from Andrew Meredith, I've absolutely loved. And this novella was no different. The one thing, and I probably mentioned this somewhere else, is that novellas aren't really my favorite format. Yeah, I think I mentioned that again later in the review, so I will leave it there. This is set at a perfect time for a novella, the end of the Protectorate Wars, which we have not yet seen their story being told, but we do know a bit about them from the Kallattian Saga and from the events that take place in there and some of the characters that are still around at that time. We also have the promise of learning more about the Protectorate Wars once Andrew D. Meredith actually writes that series. But because this takes place immediately after the wars end, but well before the Kallattian Saga, we are not in a time that needs really like a massive series to explain where things are at, because we have enough context from Kallattian Saga, and it being a novella means it's really self-contained and everything like that, and so we have enough context from what we know from Kallattian Saga, and then also in the future we know we'll be getting another series about this time, but it's also a novella which is self-contained, and so you can just kind of pick it up and read, and you don't really need to worry about being set into that context very much. But that also means that the characters don't need to be placed into that context really, because the characters, well, for one, the characters know the context. They're in-world characters, they know what's been going on in their world, but as readers, we don't need to see those characters in that context beforehand, because it's a self-contained story that just picks up in a place where you can tell this story about these characters, some of which you know from Kallattian Saga, and so you can just go back and see these characters at an earlier time, but it's unnecessary to it's not required that you've read Kallattian Saga to read this, and so it kind of just is a really good spot for a novella to be set, where it fleshes out the world a little bit, gives a little bit more information, but it's not hindered by the fact that you don't know all of the details about the surrounding events. We know who these characters are, and so we can take these little snippets or snapshots of their lives and tell the interesting little storylines that we are unaware of. And that's exactly what this one is. It follows a younger, I forget how he pronounces his name, I think it's like Nathaniel Until, as he seeks to do what's right and has to make decisions that could potentially have huge ramifications for going forward. Of course, we kind of, in Meredith does this really well, where just because we know what happens in the future doesn't mean that this current novella is hindered in any way in the storytelling that's being told, because you know that future. What he does is he tells the story that's important to the story that's being told, and just because you know a little bit about the future doesn't mean that it affects the story that you're being told or your enjoyment of it at all. But yes, it is a very important story to tell because of the characters that it involves, because of what it's setting up and how it's playing into things, even playing into Kallattian Saga as we know it. And so it's an important story to tell in that way, but it's one that I think Meredith made a good decision of not making it a full novel, because it's a fairly short story in terms of its length. It doesn't need the full novel treatment in order to tell the complete story that he's trying to tell. As always, Meredith's writing is absolutely fantastic. It's very much epic fantasy, but with a bit more of an intimate look at the story and the characters, rather than being too broad. And for me, oftentimes I have a little bit of problem with novellas, because they usually follow one character or something like that, or one little storyline, but they do it in such a way that I actually can't get engaged with it, because there's nothing really connecting me to that novella. But sometimes with a good enough author, so Sanderson is a great example of this. I've read several of his novellas, not all of them, but I've read some of them, and they're fine. Like, but they just don't engage me that much. I don't know how many I've actually read, 2 or 3. I can specifically think of Edge Dancer and The Emperor's Soul are the 2 that I can specifically think of as having read. Maybe I've read more, I can't remember. And neither of those, well, Edge Dancer for one, I don't care that much about Lift, but Emperor's Soul, the story, that's one that everybody's like, oh, this is such a good story, but I could not get engaged with that story that was being told. So I read it because I wanted to read another Sanderson and complete another book that month and stuff like that, but I never really got engaged with it. Whereas this one, this Fleeting Word by Meredith, was one that I just really enjoyed. And I'm sure it's largely due to Meredith's writing, as well as this Kallattian world that I just really love being in a way that Sanderson doesn't work for me in that same way. But I really felt that Meredith did a really good job writing this story, writing this novella in a way that I could enjoy it. Unfortunately, I did read this on ebook, which I don't enjoy doing. I don't love ebook reading, mostly because when I read an ebook, it's on my phone. I don't have an e-reader of any sort other than my phone. And so I always read ebooks on my phone, and that's just not that fun. That's not that enjoyable for me. But it also takes me a really long time to get through ebooks, and I don't care for that either. But then, like I mentioned, this is a novella as well, which automatically, and I hate saying that because I don't want it to be necessarily, but I really do tend to have to enjoy less novellas than I do a full-length novel. This is honestly my biggest complaint though about this book, was those 3 things that I read it on my phone as an ebook, it took forever for me to read, and that it was a novella. Not that the novella format was bad for this story that was being told, just that I don't resonate quite as strongly with the shorter stories like novellas or even short stories to some degree. That being said, it's still a very good novella, and it's a great place for testing out Meredith's works, for getting just dipping your toes into Kallattian saga, and yeah, so it's a great starting point as well. A solid entry point into this world if you don't want to start with the massive books, because Deathless Beast, the first book, although it's not the biggest fantasy book out there by any means, it is fairly large and fairly chunky, and it's wonderful. I love Deathless Beast, but it's definitely a bigger commitment than a novella is. So that is my review for Fleeting Word by Andrew D. Meredith. Please like, comment, and subscribe if you haven't already. Check out Andrew's writings for sure. He's got enough different things out now that you can try various different starting locations from him. If you want to try Kallattian something, try Fleeting Word, or try Deathless Beast. But he's also got Needle and Leaf, which the first book is Thrice, which I haven't actually read yet, and I need to do that one. But then he also just released a new one called Quaint Creatures, Magical and Mundane. And that's a very different type of fantasy book, but that was also very enjoyable as well. So that is my review for Fleeting Word. Thank you guys for watching, and we'll see you guys again soon. Stay well.